What if one wrong turn on your way home changed your life forever? Jalen Carter was just an ordinary kid walking back from the library wearing a black hoodie, lost in his own thoughts. But in a city where justice isn't always blind, that hoodie made him a suspect. In an instant, flashing lights, cold steel handcuffs, and accusations he couldn't outrun turned his world upside down. Was it a mistake or something much bigger? Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Jalen Carter pulled his hoodie tighter against the crisp autumn breeze as he stepped out of the Southgate High School library. The sky had begun to fade into streaks of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Memphis. It was a familiar route, one he had walked countless times, but something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the weight of his college applications pressing on his mind, or maybe it was just the eerie stillness of the neighborhood. He adjusted his backpack strap and tapped his phone, letting the rhythmic bass of his favorite hip-hop track pulse through his earbuds. It was his escape, his way of drowning out the world that always seemed to look at him a little too hard, a little too suspiciously. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Be careful out there, Jalen. Keep your hands visible. Don't talk back. Just get home." She worked long hours as a nurse, often pulling double shifts to keep them afloat. It was just the two of them, and she never let him forget that. As he turned the corner onto Fulton Plaza, he noticed flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the windows of the storefronts. His steps slowed. A small crowd had gathered outside a convenience store, murmuring in hushed tones. Two police cruisers were parked at odd angles, their doors flung open, and officers moved in sharp, purposeful motions. Jalen pulled out one of his earbuds. "Freeze! Hands where I can see them." The words came fast and sharp. Jalen barely had time to register them before he felt every muscle in his body lock up. Instinctively, he turned his head, just for a second. "Down on the ground! Now!" Panic gripped his chest. Was this really happening? He hadn't done anything. He was just walking home. Before he could utter a word, two officers rushed toward him. One shoved him hard from behind, sending him stumbling forward onto the pavement. Gravel bit into his palms as a heavy knee pressed into his back. Cold metal snapped around his wrists. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. "I didn't do anything." His voice came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "Quiet," one of the officers barked. Jalen's mind raced. This had to be a mistake. They were looking for someone else. A man stepped into view, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair beneath his sheriff's hat. There was a cold, detached calculation in his gaze. Sheriff Douglas Reeves. Jalen had seen him on the news, standing at podiums, talking tough about law and order. Now Reeves was looking at him like he had already made up his mind. 19-year-old male, black hoodie, seen fleeing the scene, one of the officers reported. Jalen felt his breath catch. He was 18. He hadn't fled from anything. "I was just—" "Save it," Reeves cut him off. He turned to one of his men. "We got him." The words felt like a sentence. Jalen tried to steady his breathing, but his chest felt tight. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, but no one stepped forward. No one said a word. A radio crackled. 19-year-old male, matching description, taken into custody. Jalen's hands clenched into fists behind his back. The cuffs dug into his skin. A police officer grabbed his arm and hauled him up. His legs felt shaky as they marched him toward the cruiser. He stole one last glance at the crowd. A woman in a headscarf shook her head. "Another one," she whispered. Jalen swallowed hard as he was shoved into the back seat. The door slammed shut, sealing him inside. Through the tinted glass, he could see the city lights flickering against the night sky. Somewhere in the distance, he heard his mother's voice again. Just get home. But tonight, he wasn't sure if he would. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and old paper. The flickering fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow on the metal table in front of Jalen. His wrists still throbbed from the tight handcuffs, his fingers twitching slightly as he tried to rub away the numbness. Across from him, a burly officer with a square jaw and narrowed eyes leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. His badge read, Detective Harris, but Jalen knew better than to think of him as anything other than another uniformed wall standing between him and his freedom. Where were you at 8:45 p.m.? Harris asked, his voice sharp, impatient. Jalen shook his head, his throat dry. I told you. I was leaving the library. I was walking home. Harris scoffed, flipping open a file. You expect me to believe that? We have security footage from the store. Look at this. He slid a grainy black and white printout toward Jalen. The image showed a figure in a hoodie running past the convenience store. Head down, face obscured. The timestamp read 8:46 p.m. Jalen swallowed hard. That's not me, Harris smirked. Funny. Looks just like you to me. Jalen stared at the picture, his mind racing. The person in the image was taller, their posture different. He could feel the panic rising in his chest. That guy's taller than me, he argued, voice cracking. You can see it. Look at the height compared to the doorframe. Harris didn't even glance at the photo. You really expect a jury to buy that? He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Here's the deal, kid. Confess now, and maybe the judge will go easy on you. Say you panicked. Say you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But if you keep lying, this is going to get real bad, real fast. Jalen's stomach twisted. I'm not lying, he whispered. The door creaked open. Sheriff Douglas Reeves stepped inside, closing the door behind him with slow, deliberate ease. His uniform was crisp, his face unreadable. He sat down across from Jalen, studying him with quiet intensity. We have a witness, Reeves said. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was suffocating. Someone who saw you near the store. Jalen's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. That's a lie. Reeves tilted his head. So now you're calling my officers liars? Jalen held his breath. He knew this game. He'd seen it before in the news, in the stories his mother warned him about. The moment he fought back, the moment he showed anger, they'd paint him as aggressive, as a threat. Reeves sighed, sitting back. Listen, son. You think this is unfair, I get it. But life's not fair. You got caught up in something bad. The sooner you admit it, the better for you. Otherwise, well, judges don't like liars. Jalen felt his heart pounding in his ears. He looked down at his lap, breathing deeply. If he said nothing, he'd lose. If he spoke up, they'd twist his words. There was no way to win. Reeves stood, straightening his belt. Think it over, he said, nodding to Harris before walking out. The door clicked shut. Jalen stared at the table, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingertips. Across the city, Monique Carter was already in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The moment she had gotten the call from the precinct, she'd left the hospital mid-shift, barely pausing to grab her purse. When she stormed into the station, she barely made it 2 steps before a uniformed officer blocked her path. I need to see my son, she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. The officer shook his head. He's being processed. You'll have to wait. Processed? Monique repeated, eyes blazing. He's a kid. He's never been arrested in his life. I need to see him. The officer didn't budge. Monique took a deep breath, her mind racing. This wasn't just a simple arrest. They weren't treating Jalen like a suspect. They were treating him like he was already guilty. She turned on her heel, pulling out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts, fingers trembling. She needed help. Now, 10 minutes later, she was sitting in her car outside the station, waiting for a call back. Her phone buzzed. Monique Carter? The voice on the other end was sharp and professional. Yes, she said quickly. My son was arrested. They won't let me see him. This is Amara Castillo with the Southern Justice Initiative. I saw your message. Tell me everything. Monique exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. They took him. They're saying he robbed a store, but he didn't. I know he didn't. There was a pause. Then Amara's voice came back, calm but firm. I believe you, and we're going to fight this. Monique closed her eyes, feeling the first flicker of hope. Back in the interrogation room, Jalen sat in silence for what felt like hours. When the door finally opened again, it wasn't Harris or Reeves. A different officer stepped inside, carrying a stack of papers. You're being charged with armed robbery, he said flatly. No bail. Jalen felt the world tilt. No bail. That meant he wasn't going home. He was going to jail. They pulled him to his feet, his legs shaking beneath him. As they led him through the hallway, past rows of holding cells, he caught sight of the front desk. His mother was there, Her hands were clenched into fists, but her face was calm. Her eyes met his, filled with something fierce, something unbreakable. She was fighting for him. As they shoved him forward, Jalen swallowed hard. He had to fight too. Jalen sat on the cold, hard cot in his cell, his back pressed against the wall, knees pulled up to his chest. The dim overhead light flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the gray cement walls. Every now and then, the clang of a distant cell door echoed through the facility, followed by muffled voices, some angry, some resigned. He hadn't slept. Every creak of metal, every footstep of the guards sent a jolt of anxiety through his body. This was nothing like he had ever imagined. He had always thought that as long as he did everything right, followed the rules and stayed out of trouble, he would be safe. But now he was locked up, surrounded by men twice his age, some staring at him through the bars with cold, detached curiosity, others barely acknowledging his presence. He felt like an outsider, even here. His mother's words played over and over in his mind. If the police ever stop you, keep your hands visible. Stay calm. Don't argue. None of it had mattered. He clenched his fists. He didn't belong here. But the system didn't care where he belonged. It only cared that he fit a description. A loud bang startled him. A guard unlocked the heavy metal door and motioned for him. "You got a visitor." Jalen stood, his legs feeling like lead. He was led down the hallway, past rows of cells, until they reached a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. A man in a dark suit sat waiting, a folder open in front of him. The guard pushed Jalen inside and shut the door behind him. The man barely looked up. "Jalen Carter?" Jalen hesitated before nodding. The man sighed, rubbing his temple. "William Crawford, I've been assigned as your public defender." Jalen sat down, his pulse quickening. His mother had said a lawyer would help. A lawyer would fix this. Crawford flipped through the pages in his folder, barely glancing at Jalen. "Look, kid, I'm going to be straight with you. This isn't good. They have you on camera, they have witnesses, and let's be honest, you fit the description." Jalen's hands gripped the edge of the table. "I didn't do anything." Crawford sighed again, finally looking at him. "Doesn't matter." He leaned forward. "The DA is offering a plea deal. If you plead guilty, you can get a reduced sentence. 3 years, maybe less with good behavior." Jalen's heart stopped. 3 years. His voice came out hoarse. "I'm not pleading guilty. I didn't do anything." Crawford shrugged. "Kid, you don't have a strong case. You don't have an alibi, no solid defense, and no jury's going to believe a teenager over law enforcement." Jalen shook his head. "So you're not even going to try?" Crawford leaned back, crossing his arms. "I've been doing this a long time. I know how these cases go. You can fight it, but if you lose, you're looking at 15, maybe 20 years. Jalen felt the weight of those words settle into his chest. "Think about it," Crawford said, closing his folder. "I'll check in before your arraignment." He stood up and walked out without another word. Jalen sat frozen, the room suddenly feeling much smaller. Monique paced the floor of the Southern Justice Initiative office, her hands trembling as she held her phone to her ear. Across the desk, Amara Castillo flipped through files on her laptop, her brow furrowed in concentration. "He's just a kid," Monique whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "They won't even let me see him." Amara nodded. "They're trying to break him. It's a classic tactic. Pressure him into pleading guilty before anyone can help." Monique took a shaky breath. "Please tell me you have something." Amara glanced at her screen. "I found something on Sheriff Reeves. He's had multiple complaints filed against him for wrongful arrests, especially targeting young black men." She turned the laptop so Monique could see. "Look at this. 3 years ago, a case almost went to trial before the charges were mysteriously dropped." Monique's stomach churned. "How is he still in power?" Amara gave her a knowing look. "Same way they always are." Monique pressed her hands against her temples. "This isn't just about Jalen. Reeves has been doing this for years." Amara nodded. "And if we can prove that, we don't just free your son, we expose him." A knock at the office door interrupted them. One of Amara's colleagues stepped inside. "We found a witness. A homeless man was near the store when the robbery happened." Monique's breath caught. "And?" The woman nodded. He says the guy who ran from the store was taller, at least 5 inches taller than Jalen. Monique felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. Where is he? He's willing to talk, but he's scared. He says the police already questioned him once, and he felt pressured to stay quiet. Amara's expression darkened. That's exactly what they do. We need to get him on record before they silence him completely. Monique's hands curled into fists. Then let's do it. Back in his cell, Jalen lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced. The lawyer wasn't going to help. The system wasn't going to help. If he wanted a chance, he had to take control. He sat up, pressing his palms against his knees. He was going to defend himself. Jalen sat on the thin mattress in his cell, his back against the cold cement wall, staring at the stack of papers his mother had managed to get to him. It was a mix of legal documents, court procedures, and notes she had scrawled in hurried handwriting, underlined and highlighted in yellow. His fingers trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages, scanning words that felt overwhelming: burden of proof, reasonable doubt, cross-examination. These weren't things he had ever thought he would need to know. He had always believed in the law, in the idea that innocence mattered. But after days locked in this cell, after being told over and over that his best option was to admit to something he didn't do, that belief was cracking. He wasn't going to let them decide his fate for him. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and kept reading. Across the city, Amara Castillo sat at her desk at the Southern Justice Initiative, her phone pressed to her ear as she scrolled through an email from a local reporter. "Yes, we're moving forward with the press release," she said firmly. "This case isn't just about one kid being wrongfully accused. This is about a system that lets men like Sheriff Reeves operate unchecked for years. We need people to see that." She ended the call and glanced at her assistant, who had just walked in with a tablet in hand. "We're getting traction," the assistant said. "A few smaller outlets have picked up the story. Social media is starting to react too. People are asking questions about Reeves's record." Amara nodded. "Good, keep pushing it. The more eyes on this case, the harder it'll be for them to sweep it under the rug." Just then, her office phone rang. She picked up. "Ms. Castillo," the voice was hesitant, male. "Speaking." A pause, then, "I used to work at Midtown Precinct. I have something you need to see." Amara's pulse quickened. "Meet me in an hour," the man said before hanging up. She stared at the phone for a moment before turning to her assistant. "Get Monique Carter on the line. I think we just found our break." Sheriff Douglas Reeves sat in his office, the dim glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. His jaw was clenched as he skimmed the headlines popping up on his computer screen. Wrongful arrest? Memphis teens case raises questions about local law enforcement pattern of misconduct? Sheriff Douglas Reeves under scrutiny. His hands curled into fists. He had worked too hard for too long to let this turn into a scandal. This was supposed to be simple. Another arrest, another conviction, another win for his department. But now reporters were circling like vultures, and people were starting to dig. He reached for his phone, dialing a familiar number. "We need to move fast," he said as soon as the line connected. "This case needs to close before it spirals out of control." There was a pause, then a measured response. "And how do you suggest we do that?" Reeves exhaled sharply, running a hand through his graying hair. "We make sure that kid doesn't have a chance to fight back. He doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the backing. If we keep him locked up long enough, his options disappear." "Are you sure about that?" the voice on the other end asked. "Because from what I hear, that lawyer from SJI is making noise. If they dig too deep," Reeves slammed his hand on the desk, "then we shut them down before they can." Another pause. "I'll see what I can do." Reeves hung up, rubbing his temple. He couldn't afford to lose control. The next morning, Amara met the former officer from Midtown Precinct at a diner on the outskirts of town. He was nervous, looking over his shoulder as he slid into the booth across from her. "You used to work under Reeves?" she asked. He nodded, fidgeting with the coffee cup in front of him. "Yeah, a few years. I got out when I realized what was really going on." Amara leaned in. "What do you mean?" The man exhaled sharply. "He has a pattern. He picks kids, Black kids, mostly, who don't have a strong defense, arrest them on flimsy evidence, and pushes for fast convictions. It makes the department's stats look good. Amara's stomach turned. You're saying this is intentional? The man scoffed. You think all these mistaken identity cases are just bad luck? She felt a chill run down her spine. Do you have proof? He hesitated. Then slowly he pulled out his phone and tapped a few buttons before handing it to her. Amara's eyes widened as she stared at the image on the screen. It was a photograph. Sheriff Reeves standing beside a man outside the Midtown precinct. A man who looked eerily similar to the suspect in the convenience store video. Who is this? She asked. The man swallowed hard. That's Lionel Brooks, small-time dealer. Been in and out of trouble for years, and he's about 6'3". Amara's mind raced. The suspect in the security footage was tall, much taller than Jalen. And now there was a picture of Reeves standing next to someone who matched that description. She looked up at the man. Why are you giving me this? His expression hardened. Because I got tired of looking the other way. Amara nodded, quickly forwarding the image to her own phone. Thank you. As she stepped out of the diner, she dialed Monique. Monique, we have something. A picture. Reeves knows the real suspect, and we might be able to prove it. There was a beat of silence. Then Monique's voice came through, steady and determined. Then let's bring him down. The night before Jalen's trial, Amara sat in her office, staring at the image on her laptop. This was it. This was what they needed. She sent the picture to her legal team, then leaned back in her chair. Tomorrow, everything would change. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back rows, their cameras flashing as Jalen was led to his seat. The air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. He could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him, judging, assuming, deciding his fate before the trial had even begun. The wooden benches of the federal courtroom in Memphis were filled with spectators, some from the local community, some there out of curiosity, and others who had already made up their minds about him. His mother sat near the front, her back straight, her eyes locked onto him, radiating a quiet strength that he desperately needed. At the judge's bench sat Judge Raymond Holloway, a man with a reputation for fairness, but also for strict adherence to the law. He adjusted his glasses, surveying the room before clearing his throat. This court is now in session, the bailiff announced. The case of State of Tennessee versus Jalen Carter will now be heard. Jalen swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edge of the defense table. He was here, alone. He had made the decision to represent himself, a move that had startled even his mother. But he had no choice. His public defender had all but abandoned him, and he refused to let someone else throw his life away. Across the room, Sheriff Douglas Reeves sat in the front row of the gallery, arms folded, his expression unreadable. But his presence alone sent a message. He was confident, certain that this was just another case that would be swept under the rug. At the prosecution's table, the district attorney, Samuel Whitaker, adjusted his tie. He was experienced, polished, and completely focused on getting a conviction. The state had every advantage: resources, expert witnesses, and a legal team determined to win. Jalen, he had the truth. Whitaker stood, his tone measured as he addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a simple case. On the night of October 12th, a convenience store was robbed. The suspect, described as a young black male in a black hoodie, fled the scene. Minutes later, the defendant, Jalen Carter, was found in the same area, wearing the exact same attire. The security footage places him at the scene. Witness testimony will confirm his involvement. And today you will see that justice must be served. He let the words settle, casting a glance toward the jury. This isn't about race. This isn't about bias. This is about facts. And the facts are clear. Jalen Carter was in the wrong place, at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing. Jalen clenched his jaw. The jury members, mostly older, mostly white, seemed receptive. Some nodded slightly. Whitaker turned and gestured toward the screen behind him. A grainy black and white video played, the footage from the convenience store. It showed a hooded figure darting past the register, a glint of something metallic in their hand. The timestamp read 8:46 p.m. There you have it, Whitaker said, turning back to the jury. A suspect matching this young man's description, running from a crime scene. It doesn't get clearer than that. Jalen's heart pounded. The jury murmured among themselves. He could feel the tide shifting against him before he had even spoken a word. Judge Holloway looked toward him. Mr. Carter, you may now present your defense. Jalen exhaled slowly and rose to his feet. His legs felt unsteady, but he forced himself to stand tall. Your Honor, members of the jury, he began, his voice cracking slightly before he steadied it. I know how this looks. I know what you've been told. But I need you to look at the facts, not just what the prosecution wants you to see. He walked toward the screen. That video, yeah, it shows someone running, someone in a hoodie. But look closer. That person is taller than me. A murmur rippled through the room. Jalen turned to the jury. You've seen me sitting here for the past hour. You've seen me stand up. I am 5'10". The door frame in that video is 7 feet tall. The person in that footage is at least 6'3". That is not me. The jury shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward slightly. I was walking home from the library, that's the truth, Jalen continued. I wasn't running. I wasn't robbing a store. I was just a kid walking home. But I got stopped because I fit the description. Because I was in the wrong neighborhood, wearing the wrong clothes. And now I'm on trial for something I didn't do. His voice grew stronger. How many times does this happen? How many kids like me get pulled into something just because they look like someone else? How many of them don't get a chance to speak up? Well, I'm speaking up. Silence filled the courtroom. Judge Holloway cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, do you have evidence to support your claim? Jalen nodded. Yes, I would like the court to review the video again, this time with height measurements included. The judge glanced toward the prosecution. Any objections? Whitaker hesitated before shaking his head. No, Your Honor. A clerk replayed the video, this time with scale markings overlaying the footage. Sure enough, the suspect was significantly taller than Jalen. The jury whispered among themselves. Whitaker frowned, quickly regaining his composure. That doesn't change the fact that you were near the crime scene, that you were found wearing the exact same hoodie as the suspect. Jalen met his gaze. So, wearing a hoodie is a crime now? A few jurors looked down uncomfortably. Whitaker exhaled sharply. The state would like to call a witness. The door at the back of the courtroom opened, and a uniformed officer stepped inside. Detective Harris. Jalen's stomach dropped. Harris took the stand, adjusting his badge as he sat. Whitaker approached. Detective, please state your role in this case. I was one of the officers on the scene, Harris said. I saw the defendant running from the area near the convenience store. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jalen's blood ran cold. This was a lie. He had never run. His mother stiffened in the front row. Whitaker turned to the jury, his voice steady. You heard it yourself. A trained officer saw the suspect, this suspect, fleeing. Jalen's mind raced. His whole case had just been thrown into chaos. The courtroom was tense. Jalen could feel it in the way people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, in the way the prosecutor sat a little too still, in the way Sheriff Reeves, sitting in the front row, clenched his jaw just slightly. Something was happening. The energy in the room had changed. And then, Amara Castillo stood. Your Honor, she said, her voice carrying a confidence that demanded attention. The defense would like to present new evidence regarding a pattern of misconduct by Sheriff Douglas Reeves. A ripple of murmurs spread across the courtroom. Judge Holloway arched an eyebrow. Proceed. Amara stepped forward, glancing at Jalen briefly before turning back to the jury. This case isn't just about Jalen Carter. It's about a system that has failed countless young men like him. She walked to the projector screen and clicked a remote. A series of case files appeared on the screen. Names, dates, mugshots. This, she continued, is a list of individuals who were wrongfully arrested under Sheriff Reeves's jurisdiction. Many of them were released after months or even years, with no charges ever filed against them. And the pattern is clear: young, black, and unable to afford a proper defense. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even some of the jurors exchanged glances. Whitaker, the prosecutor, stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant to the case at hand. Judge Holloway considered for a moment before nodding. Ms. Castillo, Unless you can connect this directly to Mr. Carter's case, I suggest you move on. Amara didn't waver. I intend to, Your Honor. The defense would like to call a witness. The door at the back of the courtroom opened. A man stepped inside, his face lined with the wear of years in uniform. He adjusted his tie, looking momentarily at Reeves, who went completely still. Please state your name for the record, Amara said. The man cleared his throat. Former Sergeant Michael Grayson. Jalen watched as murmurs broke out again. Amara leaned against the podium. Mr. Grayson, can you tell the court your previous position? Grayson nodded. I worked under Sheriff Reeves for 10 years. I left the force 3 years ago. And why did you leave? Grayson hesitated. His eyes flicked toward Reeves, then back to Amara. Because I saw things I couldn't ignore anymore. The room fell silent. Amara took a step closer. What kind of things? Grayson exhaled sharply. Sheriff Reeves pressured officers to pin crimes on easy targets. People who couldn't fight back. People like Jalen. A gasp spread through the audience. Jalen felt his heartbeat hammer against his ribs. Are you saying, Amara pressed, that Sheriff Reeves has falsified charges before? Grayson nodded. I saw it firsthand. If an arrest looked shaky, Reeves would find a way to make it stick. Sometimes that meant pressuring witnesses. Other times it meant adjusting reports. Officers who didn't comply didn't last long in his precinct. Whitaker shot up. Objection! Hearsay! Amara turned calmly to Judge Holloway. Your Honor, I have a sworn affidavit from another officer who corroborates this claim. She handed a document to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. Holloway scanned it before sighing. I'll allow it, for now. Proceed carefully, Ms. Castillo. Grayson looked directly at Reeves, his voice steady. The night Jalen was arrested? I guarantee you, Reeves had already decided he was guilty before they even put the cuffs on him. Jalen felt the weight of those words press against his chest. He had always known he was being set up, but now it wasn't just his word against the system. Sheriff Reeves stood abruptly. This is absurd. The judge looked at him sharply. Sheriff, sit down. Reeves didn't. I have served this city for 20 years. I have put criminals behind bars. And now you're letting some washed-up officer slander me? Judge Holloway's patience was thinning. You'll have your chance to respond. Sit down. Reeves hesitated for only a second before dropping back into his seat, his jaw tight. Jalen watched him closely. The man who had seemed so untouchable, so sure of himself, was finally looking rattled. Amara wasn't finished. Your Honor, there's one more piece of evidence. The bailiff wheeled in a TV screen, connecting it to a laptop. Amara turned to the jury. This video was leaked online last night. It was taken inside the Midtown precinct by an officer who has chosen to remain anonymous for their safety. She hit play. The grainy footage showed a dimly lit office. Sheriff Reeves sat behind his desk, leaning forward, his voice low but clear. Across from him was another officer, Detective Harris. You're sure he was running? Reeves asked. Harris hesitated. I mean, he was just standing there when we saw him, but... You saw him running, Reeves interrupted. His tone was sharper now. There was a long pause. Then Harris nodded slowly. Yeah, I saw him running. The video cut out. Silence. The jury sat frozen. The audience held its breath. Even Judge Holloway looked stunned. Reeves bolted to his feet. That video means nothing. It's been edited. It's out of context. Whitaker looked pale. The entire case had just crumbled in front of him. Judge Holloway straightened his tie, his face unreadable. I think we've heard enough for today. He turned to the jury. We will reconvene tomorrow. Jalen sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had a chance now, a real chance. But the fight wasn't over yet. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. Every seat was filled, every gaze locked on the unfolding battle. The once assured Sheriff Douglas Reeves now sat rigid at the witness stand, his fingers gripping the wooden armrest. His jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the room for an escape. But there was none. Amara Castillo stood in the center of the room, her presence commanding. She adjusted her blazer, took a slow breath, then turned toward Reeves. Sheriff Reeves, she began, her voice calm but firm. Please state your position for the court. Reeves shifted slightly. Sheriff of Midtown Precinct, elected official. Amara nodded. And in that role, you oversee law enforcement procedures, including arrest, correct? That's correct, Reeves replied. His voice was steady, but his grip on the armrest tightened. Amara took a step closer. In your years as sheriff, have you ever ordered an officer to detain a suspect based solely on a vague description? Reeves' expression flickered. Law enforcement operates on reasonable suspicion. That wasn't my question, Amara cut in, her tone sharper. Have you at any point directed officers to arrest individuals based only on generalized descriptions, without direct evidence? Reeves hesitated. I follow standard protocol. Jalen, sitting at the defense table, leaned forward. He could see the slight tension in Reeves's shoulders, the small twitch at his temple. Amara stepped closer. Let me be more specific. Did you, on the night of October 12th, instruct your officers to detain the first black male they found in a hoodie, regardless of whether or not he was involved? Reeves's face hardened. That's an insult to my department. Amara didn't flinch. So you deny it? Absolutely, he snapped. A murmur ran through the audience. Jalen glanced at his mother in the front row. She sat still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face unreadable. Amara turned to Judge Holloway. Your Honor, I'd like permission to introduce new evidence. Whitaker, the prosecutor, shot up. Objection! The defense has already presented enough distractions from the facts of this case. Judge Holloway looked toward Amara. What evidence? Amara signaled to her assistant, who wheeled in a screen. The courtroom went silent as the video from the previous day, the leaked footage of Reeves coercing Detective Harris, played once more. Jalen watched as the jury took it in again, the slight gasps, the way their expressions shifted. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. This was proof. When the video ended, Amara turned back to Reeves. Sheriff, do you still deny manipulating this investigation? Reeves' face was red now. This is an edited video, Amara raised an eyebrow. So you're saying the audio is fake? That you didn't tell your officer to lie? Reeves' mouth opened, then closed. Whitaker stood abruptly. Your Honor, the sheriff is not on trial here. Judge Holloway tapped his gavel once. Not yet, Mr. Whitaker. But if this testimony continues in the direction it's going, I may have no choice but to recommend an independent review. Whitaker paled. Jalen felt his pulse quicken. Was this actually happening? Just then, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A woman in a navy blue suit strode in, a badge clipped to her belt. The room turned toward her as she walked straight to the front, leaned in, and whispered something to the judge. Judge Holloway listened, nodded, then cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed that a federal investigation into Sheriff Douglas Reeves's conduct has been officially opened by the Department of Justice. A stunned silence fell over the room. Jalen turned to look at Reeves. The once powerful sheriff was now pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. Judge Holloway looked toward Reeves. Sheriff, you are hereby instructed to remain in this courtroom. You will be questioned further after these proceedings conclude. Whitaker sat down heavily, rubbing his forehead. Jalen let out a slow breath. For the first time, it felt like the walls that had been closing in on him were beginning to crack. The jury was dismissed to deliberate. The moment they left the room, the whispers began, among reporters, among the public, among the attorneys. Jalen stayed seated, his hands gripping his knees, his heart still pounding. His mother reached for his hand. He looked at her, and he saw something different in her eyes. Hope. We did it, she whispered. Jalen didn't answer. Not yet. The jury still had to decide. The courtroom was silent, not the kind of silence that felt empty, but the kind that pressed down on every single person in the room, thick with anticipation, with fear, with something heavy and unspoken. Jalen sat at the defense table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His mother sat behind him, barely breathing, her fingers intertwined as if in prayer. Amara Castillo stood beside him, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the jury box. Across the room, Sheriff Douglas Reeves sat motionless. His face was a mask, unreadable, but his fingers drummed lightly against his knee, a subtle betrayal of nerves. Judge Holloway adjusted his glasses. Has the jury reached a verdict? The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a solemn expression, stood up, holding a small slip of paper. We have, Your Honor. Jalen's breath caught in his throat. The bailiff took the paper, handed it to the judge. Holloway read it over, his face unreadable. He nodded once, then looked toward the jury. Please read the verdict. The foreman cleared his throat. In the case of State of Tennessee versus Jalen Carter, we find the defendant. Jalen felt his entire world narrow to this single moment. Not guilty. The words hit him like a wave. He blinked, his mind struggling to catch up, to process. A sharp gasp broke through the silence. His mother. Then came the noise. A sudden, overwhelming rush of voices. Murmurs, gasps, cheers. Jalen barely registered the sound before he felt his mother's arms wrap around him, her body shaking as she sobbed into his shoulder. My baby, she whispered through her tears. My baby. Jalen closed his eyes, holding on to her like a lifeline. It was over. He was free. Amara placed a hand on his shoulder. You did it, she murmured. You fought, and you won. But Jalen knew this wasn't just about him. Across the courtroom, Sheriff Reeves remained seated. His face had paled, his lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't looking at Jalen anymore. He was staring straight ahead at nothing, at everything falling apart around him. He stood suddenly, smoothing out his uniform. Without a word, he turned and strode out of the courtroom, pushing past reporters who were already firing off questions. He walked quickly, stiffly, but Jalen knew the truth. He was running, and the law was finally catching up to him. The aftermath came swiftly. Within hours of the verdict, the CIA announced an official investigation into Sheriff Reeves. The leaked video, the testimonies, the pattern of wrongful arrests, it was enough to crack open every case he had ever touched. News reports flooded the airwaves. Former inmates came forward. Families who had lost years to false charges demanded justice. Prosecutor Samuel Whitaker, once so confident in his case against Jalen, now found himself under relentless scrutiny. He resigned quietly, hoping to escape the storm, but the damage was done. The system that had tried to bury Jalen was now collapsing in on itself. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Reporters, activists, everyday people who had followed the case from the start. The moment Jalen stepped through the doors, a cheer erupted. Cameras flashed. Microphones were pushed toward him. He squinted against the light, his heart pounding. A reporter stepped forward. Jalen, what do you want to say after everything you've been through? He hesitated, looking at his mother, at Amara, at the people who had fought for him when no one else would. Then he turned to the cameras. Today I won, he said, his voice steady. But how many others never get the chance to defend themselves? The crowd fell silent. Then slowly people began to nod. Some clapped. Some murmured in agreement. Because this wasn't just about one case. This was about all the others. Jalen walked away from the courthouse hand in hand with his mother. The sunlight felt warmer, brighter, as if the entire world had shifted just slightly. He didn't know exactly what came next, but he did know one thing. He wasn't done fighting, because somewhere out there, another kid just like him was sitting in a cold jail cell, terrified and alone, trapped by a system designed to crush him. And maybe, just maybe, Jalen Carter was going to be the one to change that. Justice isn't just about guilt or innocence. It's about who gets the chance to be heard. Jalen Carter fought not only for his freedom, but for the truth, exposing a system that had silenced too many for too long. But how many others never get that chance? How many voices go unheard? This isn't just one boy's story. It's a call to pay attention, to question, and to demand better. Because justice should never be a privilege. What do you think? Have you ever witnessed injustice firsthand? Drop a comment below and let's talk. And if you want more stories that challenge, inspire, and make you think, hit subscribe and stay with us.